What if there was a way for your thoughts, your words, to be sent into the future and to be understood and appreciated by someone anywhere on the planet? Would that not make us, in a way, immortal and give us the power to communicate across time and space? When we were inquisitive children curled up under the blankets, flashlight in hand, reading our favorite story, were we not actually inviting the author of that story into our innermost space to share their thoughts, their stories with us in their words? I'm Bella St. John. Join us as we venture together to explore the history of those words in A Novel Idea.
Oh, Richard, I love that you've actually agreed to be part of this. With all of the different authors that I have on this program, they've come from different perspectives, etc., but not one of them has actually made a career, first of all, in the arena that you wanted to be in as you were growing up, but then also became an international expert in the thing that kind of brought you into the career in the first place. So we're going to get into that as we go along. But tell me, to begin with, let's go back to the very, very beginning. You grew up in the Carolinas on a tobacco farm.
Yes.
I see very few people watching this will know what life is like growing up on a tobacco farm.
Well, it was a wonderful life. And let me say, Bella, I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. But idyllic in the 50s and 60s, growing up on a tobacco farm in North Carolina. And from the get-go, recognizing that I wanted to be a teacher. You see, my mother taught me in first grade, taught me how to read. And my two brothers kind of followed in my dad's footsteps. They became tobacco farmers, but I followed in the footsteps of four generations of teachers in the Gentry family. My great grandfather was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. My grandmother was one of the youngest teachers in North Carolina in the early or late 1800s, and she taught in a one-room schoolhouse. And and they all used the same book. I brought it to show you.
So please, you have it with you.
I do. It's the Webster's famous blue back speller. And of course, I'm the author of spelling books now. Yes. That's my work. But yes. A couple of things I want to show you from this book.
Please. First, actually, while you're finding them, a couple of interesting things about Webster, about Noah Webster. Yeah, yes. He was the uncle of T.S. Eliot.
Oh, now that's a new one, a new fact for me.
And he started the very first newspaper in New York City.
I knew about that. He was the father of American education. What happened was that he published this book. And of course, he was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and he went to Yale. And he, at the end of the Revolution, he had gone to law school, but he ended up not wanting to be an attorney, but it was the end of the American Revolution, and he wanted American children not to have to use British textbooks. And so he wrote the very first American textbook, and it began with this famous blue-backed speller. And it was called, this is a later edition called the American Spelling Book. And there are two interesting things I'd like to show you real quickly. One is that a lot of what is in this spelling book, a lot of the patterns and some of his techniques are the same kind of techniques that I use in my spelling books today, and they have been vindicated because they're now supported by cognitive psychology and neuroscience. And his aspiration was to teach America to read. In the 1800s, while he was writing his dictionary, which everybody knows about, he sold this book sold over 60 million copies. And I think it's so interesting that my great-grandfather and grandmother and my dad learned to read from this very book. And because you, Bella, are into eloquence, I wanted to show you this. This particular book, isn't that eloquent writing?
That is beautiful.
And do you see what her name is?
Bella.
They were all also into handwriting in an elegant way in that era. So all very, very fun.
Yes. Well, I actually write with a gold fountain pen.
Oh, see? Eloquence.
It travels around the world with me, I must say, and I do love it.
Well, actually, fantastic.
I now travel around the world with two of them, because at one point I thought I'd lost one until I found it exactly where I'd left it after I'd bought another one identical.
Great. Always a backup plan, huh?
Exactly. So now the other one lives in my handbag. So
fantastic.
So you mentioned the techniques that Webster used are similar and in some cases the same as the ones that you use. So that, if you like, brings us to your first book, which I think is wonderful. Spell is a 4-letter word. And the reason that I think that that's wonderful is, with this accent that comes from all over the world, and I did live in America for some time, one of the first things that I thought was very interesting when I did move to America was just simply the spelling differences and how many words in English have one extra letter in them to American English. And that was just what I thought was just really funny when I saw spell spelled with it, S-P-E-L. But so that was back in 1987. So can you start us there, please? What was your journey like writing that first book? How long did it take you? Bring us back to before 1987 and then culminating in that book being published.
Well, and that was an interesting journey for me, because in that case, I had written I was a young, brand new professor, actually at Western Carolina University in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. And I had written a number of articles that had been published in magazines for teacher staff development. And the publisher, Heinemann, called me and asked me to do a book on, if I would do a short little concise book in a series they were doing called Bright Ideas about spelling. And the idea of spell is a 4-letter word, S-P-E-L, relates to how very young children in kindergarten and first grade learn to read, and how we can see them going through a developmental process in 5 stages that begin in kindergarten with random letters. By the end of kindergarten, their spelling is actually a window into their brain. It shows how they're thinking about reading. End of kindergarten, they are making a partial connection with sounds. That is, some of the letters in a word like eagle, they may have the E that matches Humpty Dumpty. They may have the H and the D. Then they move into another phase in the beginning of first grade that is very powerful, because they can spell all of the sounds in a word. Eagle would be E-G-L. All of the sounds are represented. Of course, it doesn't look like English spelling, but it's a a time when beginners are in that phase that they are using phonics. They're beginning to use phonics, but their concept of how reading works is that they're trying to look at each letter and get the sound. Well, if you try a word like interesting, all of the, about 10 letters, English doesn't work that way. So what has to happen is that they move to phase 4 by the end of first grade, and they consolidate that knowledge of phonics, of short vowel patterns, of E-marker patterns, of ING patterns. Those are consolidated into chunks so that frees the in the phase 3, it's very laborious because they're trying to think of what's the letter, how do I make it, how do I write that letter. It's a very slow process, and by phase 4, it becomes automatic. They recognize interesting as patterns, and that enables them to get that spelling into their long-term memory and the left hemisphere of the brain. So
it's interesting.
Yes.
I was going to say, interesting when you mentioned the EGL, because that's one of the foundations of understanding hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
Because essentially the different hieroglyphs are the sound of that element, and so it's fascinating just making that correlation between the two.
Absolutely it relates so well. Absolutely.
And one thing that I also find fascinating is that you were talking about a process of letters in a certain order, but you, sir, are one of the leading experts in the world in the field of dyslexia, for one of the primary reasons being that you have spent a lifetime working on how to be really effective as a person with dyslexia, because that is who you are. Can you please share us a little bit about that journey? Back from childhood, for instance, when did you realize that reading was different for you than for other people? And what was your process? And your mother being your first grade teacher, how was she a part of that process?
It's really amazing. I really didn't know that I had dyslexia until I was an adult. But I always recognized that by fifth grade, I always had excellent grades in school, from elementary through middle grade, through high school, through college, and even graduate school. I was academically inclined, but I worked very hard at it. And I'm not even sure the term dyslexia was around when certainly the folks in my school district didn't know about dyslexia. But I did recognize that I had a very slow reading rate. And part of what happened is, I had the grit and determination and perseverance to overcome this slow reading rate. And it wasn't until I was in college that I really connected made a powerful connection with the notion of how important spelling was for reading, and developed some of the strategies that I still share today with people who are dyslexic.
It's interesting, when I looked a little bit further into some of your techniques and strategies, and also why we're having so many challenges with children now as far as literacy is concerned, because we're not teaching them spelling. I made so many different comparisons to the basics of spelling to the basics of learning mathematics, and also the basics of spelling to being able to learn different languages. And just having those foundations there, I think, is so incredibly important. But we could have a whole other program on that. Actually, we might do. That would be a really interesting series. But moving on, so you've written 17 books now?
17 books and including a spelling series, which series for spelling books for grades kindergarten through grade 6 and 8, up to 8.
And so you are in the category of traditionally published author. How did you go about getting a publishing contract with a publishing house?
Well, that first one, remember, they called me. But the general process is for me has been to come up with a concept, and most of the publishers that I work with want to get a proposal, and so they will have me do kind of an outline of what it is I want to accomplish, my goals, and general outline of the chapters that might be in this book. And then they want a sample chapter, for example. They don't want the whole thing generally. They just want a sample. And you work as a team with the publishing editor, and it's a wonderful process. You really become a family, working around the concept of this book that you're both trying to put out.
And I love the fact that you said it's a wonderful process. I have a friend of mine who won't be on this particular series, who has been traditionally published, who thinks that apart from giving birth to her children, the actual childbirth bit, it was the most painful episode of her life, going through the editing process.
Well, but I think that metaphor is perfect because it's painful. There's some painful aspects of one painful thing that happened on the first book. My Spell is a 4-letter word book was they totally rejected what I sent in. It was it was like the baby was stillborn, but they liked the idea and gave me some ideas about how we could move forward. And I think giving birth must be one of the most wonderful things that a woman could have happen. But it's scary at times and painful at times. And this process of giving birth to a book works, I think, a lot the same way. And it takes you need a lot of help with this process, and that author team with the publisher, and sometimes I have published with co-authors. It really takes a lot of folks coming together to finally get the final product.
So from the moment you say, I wake up for me, the hamsters in my head tend to wake me up at like 2:17 in the morning with a brilliant idea. It's like, get a clock and I'm asleep. So when your hamsters wake you up at 2:17 in the morning and have another brilliant idea for a book, what is your process to go from through to presenting it to a publisher?
It's just amazing that you mentioned that, because that's exactly what happens to me. And my process is to often get up and just write down the major, thing that's come to me. Sometimes it's a book title, for example, and I'll just, write down enough so that I can pick up in the morning when I'm generally back in my office at 9 a.m. in the morning. My brain doesn't function before 9, and and I can get into the flow.
Yeah, we have that in common as well, about not functioning before 9. Yeah. So with your particular writing process, when you're actually now in the throes of writing the book, do you suffer from what they call writer's block? And if so, what do you do about it?
I don't have, I don't really suffer from writer's block, but I have developed a technique that works very well for me. If I'm writing a chapter or in the middle of a book, I never finish the chapter. I'm going to stop somewhere that so before the end of it, so that I can come back and just pick right back up. So that, it's not like, oh, I've got to, come up with a new plan because the plan is already in place. It's already going. And that really has worked well for me. The other thing is that I have this process of, because I'm dyslexic, I not only have a very slow reading rate, but it probably takes me longer to write an article or a book than folks who do not have dyslexia. And so I will come back and revise, like even for my Psychology Today articles, I may come back and revise that, reread it 50 times before. It'll take me a week, where I think it would take most folks maybe a day or two to write something. So that's part of how I get over the writer's block thing, because I know I'm going to come back to it and I'm going to revise it. And it kind of takes on a life of its own. One never knows what it's going to end up like. Because it takes on a life of, my writing takes on a life of its own. I have a general notion of where I'm supposed to be going with something, but also sometimes I'm very surprised. It goes in a different direction than I was planning originally.
And I don't think that it's necessarily a negative that it takes you a week to write something that somebody else might do in a day or two. So I've heard from a lot of really successful authors who prefer to write by hand, for the reason being that it slows them down. And it's not just automatic, my fingers work at the speed of light, so it's just whatever comes out. It's like, no, you're crafting the words, you're crafting the letters onto the page. And I don't know, it seems like there's a different bond. When I'm journaling, for instance, I have to journal with my lovely pen.
Yeah.
But if I'm writing, I will write, but if I get stuck on a passage, then it's me and a blank sheet of paper. And I go back to writing by hand. So I don't necessarily even think I think that could be a positive, that it takes you a week.
Absolutely. And, there's some neuroscience and cognitive science that supports the notion that it's better if you're taking notes, for example. It's better to take notes in a manuscript or with a pencil or pen than on a keyboard. And the reason is that your brain has to analyze it. It's not a mechanical thing. So it sounds like that very same process.
Yes. And similarly, from that perspective as well, when you do write that, your brain does register where on the page certain things were placed. And so it is actually easier to come back and go back and edit and make your alterations, etc. So
Absolutely.
Do you enjoy the writing process?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, do you enjoy the writing process?
Oh, yeah. It's really a wonderful process for me, because I just kind of get into the flow of it. And I can't write well if I'm being interrupted. When I'm writing, I can't stop and do this or that. I need to have a block of time that I'm totally uninterrupted. And often when I'm in the flow, so to speak, I'm surprised because I look at the clock and all this time has passed, but I'm just so into what I'm doing that it's a kind of joyful feeling to be able to have that. It's interesting. One of the things that I do is that's very relaxing. I watercolor artist. And it's very much the same process that I can, when I watercolor, I can't have, when I'm painting a watercolor, I can't, I can't be interrupted. I have to have a block of time, usually 3 days or so when I'm trying to do a watercolor. And I get into the flow, and it just is very relaxing for me.
I love that. And so your life now, you're living in Mobile, Alabama.
Yes.
Okay. So
I've lived interestingly, I've lived all around from the tobacco farm. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and then I went to the University of Virginia for graduate studies, and went to the university in the Great Smoky Mountains. And then I ended up with 2 full-time jobs, and I took a risk. I gave up the university position after 16 years and was tenured and full professor, and became self-employed as a researcher and writer, and have lived in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, downtown Chicago, on the beach in Fort Lauderdale, but now in Mobile, Alabama, because I have lots of family here, and I'm into historic preservation. And of course, Mobile is a very historic city, beautiful. And I live in a 100-year-old home surrounded by in a canopy of oaks, which Mobile is very famous for.
Oh,
so
it's a beautiful area where you live. It's stunning.
Absolutely.
You're definitely, though, an East Coast boy.
Yes, I'm.
Ventured far over the other direction.
I love California, the wine country, and wonderful cities, and lots of places. I've been to all the states except Alaska, but I'm really East Coast, and yeah,
it is
it's part of me.
Yes, it truly is different on the east to the west, and yeah,
Yes.
and the buildings and the history and the culture. And so, okay, I have some final questions, so for us to wrap up. What is the most important lesson that you have learned so far on your author journey?
Oh, I think that one always has to keep in mind what it is one wants to accomplish in life. What kind of impact do I want to have in my life? And I've just been blessed to be an author who can have impact on the lives of children. My children are the children of the household of God. And if I can teach kids to read and to spell, it's really a gift for a lifetime. And that's what keeps me going, keeps me excited about this process. And just the opportunities that come, like just having this opportunity to share with you and for you to share some of my work. I really feel blessed in this life.
Well, no, and I'm actually loving having this conversation with you. There are so many areas where I'm actually biting my tongue because I really want to dive in, and I'm going, no, we don't have time for that today. So, next question, sir. If you could invite any 5 authors, living or dead, over for dinner and a chat, and maybe a bottle of wine. I don't know. Do you drink wine?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yes, definitely. So you're on this side of the pond. I'm currently in Europe. Yeah, the wine's on me. So which 5 authors, living or dead, would you invite for dinner and a chat and some wine, and why?
Well, I would start out with some of those founding fathers, maybe Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and Noah Webster would be fun to have in a group. And I think, there's so many wonderful current authors. It'd be really That's a difficult question for me. One guy I would like to brought his book to meet. Its name is Richard Grant, and he is an award-winning Richard Grant. He's an award-winning British travel author. He's traveled all the world, China, Africa, Mexico, and he goes on these wild adventures, and then he writes about it with passion, and he explores the culture. But he ended up in the Delta of Mississippi, and he wrote this book with they lived in New York, he and his girlfriend, and they ended up moving to this place called Pluto, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta. And they ended up in this plantation home that they had to renovate, and the journey that they went together and exploring the culture. And he says that Pluto, Mississippi, is the most American place in America. So and he gets into jazz music and the racial tension and around the world, but has such brilliant ideas about how that all fits together. So he's someone I'd really like to have a glass of wine with.
I agree. I think that sounds fascinating. I actually spent quite some time in a place that I affectionately called Nowhere, Louisiana. And it was basically like an hour and a half to get bread and milk. And so, yeah, same sort of thing, you know, just that. Look, just the conversations that you would overhear of, you know, Fred did the wrong thing by Harry, so now Fred's at the bottom of the bayou. And, you know, it's like, really?
You'll love this book, because that's exactly the experience that he and his wife, they later got married, and they were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely.
I love it. Well, that sounds like a good dinner. Well, if you can make it 6, I'll come and join you.
Absolutely.
Collection of people. All right. So last 2 questions. What is the best piece of advice that you can give to somebody starting out on their author journey? So they might not even have an idea for their book yet, but they're just one of those people that always knew that they had a book in them that they wanted to write.
I think a good thing is just, get started. Just sit down and start writing, and something's going to come to you. Do it in short spurts at first. Don't start out to write, a 400-page novel, but try some ideas out and see where it leads you.
And Richard, you have an incredible legacy, particularly supporting people as far as spelling in their education and dyslexia, etc. Out of all of this, what do you hope is your greatest legacy to the world as an author?
Well, I'd like to have a legacy a lot like Noah Webster, that my life enabled many, many people around not just America, but around the English-speaking world to learn to read. And, that's the kind of legacy that I'd like to have.
Yeah, I don't think there can be a better legacy than helping people to read, frankly. I mean, you're going into a library, if libraries still exist. That's so sad. But go into a library, and one of my favorite things growing up was filling up my library card and getting a brand new one. But you can go, if you can read, you can go into a library, you can learn anything. It's free. You can go anywhere. There are books to take you anywhere. There are fiction books that just take you on escapisms. I think reading is one of the greatest gifts that anybody can give. And I just feel so blessed on behalf of the world that you've given that gift to so many.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope to continue that.
Dr. Richard Gentry, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
I'm so honored. Thank you.